Hello and welcome to Fiber Optics Redefined with Cleerline Technology. I'm your host, Matt Dodd, and joining me for this episode, we've got Rob Daddario back in the house. Hi, Rob.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or whatever.
Something like that. Yeah. In fact, as you're looking at my camera now, you're seeing into the future.
Exactly.
And Ryan's back with me, Ryan Prentice, father
Morning,
of
Matt.
Dylan, who we had last week. Dylan did a good job, actually. Ryan?
That's great.
Good. You okay?
All good.
He's going to be a man of few words today, Rob. Lots of why, when, wheres. In this episode, we're trying to get right to say, get on with it, Matt. Our time is precious. Today, we're talking about fiber optics, or fiber in smart homes. Why, Rob, have we decided to make this an early episode of the podcast?
Well, overall, smart home design and smart home technology is going through an evolutionary period again. We've seen this a couple of times, and I think that it's really important to get out in front of it and understand what's going on, especially in the U.S. market, but globally in general. Bandwidth to the home is increasing. We've put a lot of money into the market now in the U.S. through the government to connect more people at a much higher level. And the cord cutting, or the evolution of cable television and how we get our content, has accelerated dramatically coming out of the pandemic, where streaming is a much more viable and really becoming the dominant force as we go into this next generation of technology in the home.
It's, I hate the term future-proofing, but it's the closest they're going to get to it right in the smart home arena. The integration of fiber optics is naturally going to contribute to the next level of technology. But is that the way it's being seen, Ryan, at the moment? Or is it still a bit of a battle to switch people over from the typical good old copper that they're used to installing?
Oh, I think the battle's still there. There's more and more adoption of fiber. But, copper continues to work, which is the battle. They keep finding ways to compress and get things to work. Reliability seems to be more of an issue. While it does work at some point, or sometimes it doesn't work consistently. So I think we're seeing sort of the aha moment for a lot of people to say, I've got to make this more reliable. People are looking at different things, not just the infrastructure they're putting in, but the time it takes to go back and fix things that are out of their control, where fiber makes things a lot more reliable.
Over here, this side of the pond, we're seeing a lot of fiber to the property now. I trust it's the same pretty much everywhere, right?
Yeah. I think getting fiber to the building, whether it's residence or commercial, is one thing, but then the typical installation still converts back to copper. We're in fire season where I'm at, so it's kind of like trying to put a forest fire out with a garden hose. Doesn't really make logical sense at that point.
As a client, surely they're going to be helping us fight the fight. And I should say fire analogy, but surely the client's going to be helping us along here to say, hang on a minute. I'm spending quite a lot of money on smart home technology. I've got fiber coming onto the property, yet you're putting that to copper. Is that conversation happening, or does the client not really care about the infrastructure itself? I just want the toys at the end of it.
In my opinion, I don't think that the clients pay much attention to it. That's why they hire a professional to do the installation, and they assume that what they're asking for is that they're going to get the best option available.
It's pretty embarrassing when the 16-year-old says, Dad, do you know what you're doing here, though?
Yeah. It's a constant education to get people not only to understand the new technology or fiber optics in general, but to get people to change. Yeah. And change is a very difficult thing. Habits are hard to break.
So talking of that new technology then, how does the implementation of fiber optics into smart homes, how is that going to enable the scalability for new devices and technologies moving forward? What does it look like from a scalability perspective in your opinion, Rob?
Well, we're accustomed to believing that wireless is going to solve most of our problems when it comes to connectivity and the devices that we put in our home. And the number of devices that we're putting in our home that are connected to the internet is just increasing every year. the amount of things that can actually connect. And even if they're not using a lot of bandwidth, they're actually using a lot of network horsepower just in terms of the routing and the various different transmissions and the just going out and giving a status update every X amount of seconds to notify that the device is working properly is clogging the network, right? So when we talk about network topography, there's the wired level, the physical level, and then there's the wireless. And we really have to understand that the wireless also has the connectivity to that physical level that eventually 10 gigabits is not going to be enough, because if you're connecting 100 or 200 devices to one WAP at 10 gig, there's not enough bandwidth to share there to get your streaming or to get whatever the important piece of data that you're trying to have uninterrupted, whether it's a voice or data or video call. We're going to have to increase the bandwidth to those devices, even on the wireless side. So with that, we've reached basically the ultimate bandwidth of copper being 10 gig for the home for the most part. I mean, listen, Cat 8 can do 40 gig, but it can only do it to about 40 meters. And it's a big cable, and it's more expensive, and it's harder to work with. So when we look at fiber versus copper, with copper, we've migrated from Cat 3 to Cat 5 to Cat 5e to Cat 6 to Cat 6a to Cat 7 to Cat 8. What's on the horizon? They've had to re-engineer the cable to reduce the noise within the cable so that they can increase the amount of bandwidth that's going to the end devices. The contrast to that with fiber is that the bandwidth is inherent in the glass itself. In fact, we haven't tapped all of it, whether it's multi-mode or single mode. And we can basically change the optics on the end and the equipment on the end of the cable to increase the bandwidth within the home or network, as it may be. And that's what people have to start to wrap their head around, is that when you put a fiber infrastructure in place, you're getting the low latency, you're getting the higher level reliability, you're reducing EMI, RF interference. So your air conditioners or just the lighting cable next to your data cable is not going to affect your data throughput the way that copper is affected. And in the long term, you have the bandwidth that's built into that cable for the future devices that take advantage of it. And that's a major change.
Okay, but let's just talk PoE for a second, because I was only 2 days ago having a conversation with a buddy of mine, integrator. Yeah, but we've got power over Ethernet. We're utilizing it more and more and more. We need it. Power over light, not possible. Discuss.
You want to take that one, Ryan, or do you want me?
No one really wants to take it. This was his problem. Nobody wants to answer that. He's got a point, but it's got to be on your radar, right?
Absolutely. And it's been on our radar for some time. And it's not just PoE. PoE has various different levels up to plus, which can do basically 90 watts, 48 volts, but also USB power delivery. And as USB becomes more ubiquitous and really more common as a networking tool, because the architecture of USB 4.0 is a lot different than 1.0. And that enables a lot of things in terms of bidirectional data throughput at a much higher level, as well as power delivery. We're going to have to look at hybrid cables and solutions that actually distribute power, DC power. The irony is we're all talking about efficiencies in the home and reducing the overall environmental footprint of our homes in terms of energy usage and consumption. And one of the biggest problems that we have is that we're constantly converting back and forth between AC and DC. And every time we do that, it's somewhere between 10 and 25% loss in terms of the energy. So if we can be better about power distribution within the home by actually powering our DC devices with DC directly instead of AC converted to DC, we're going to be more efficient. We're going to actually help the environment as well as create a more manageable network and topography for the devices that are in there. Also more stable, right? If we're working with DC, you can reduce a lot of the issues around lightning strikes, because your power source is generally the one thing that fails in a lightning strike first and foremost. And if you're replacing one instead of 50, it's a lot easier. And at the end of the day, you can manage that a lot more effectively in terms of putting some type of surge protection or a wall between you and the lightning strike. But at the end of the day, yes, power delivery is an important issue for fiber, and there are solutions on the horizon.
Ryan, is there, in your research, a pretty big market, or what's the size of the market for retrofitting or an update of an older home? something that's had all of its cables fitted before the walls were closed 25 years ago, 15 years ago. The guy wants a whole new refit. Where are we at with that market?
I think that it's geographical for one. Obviously, in the UK, there's a lot of old buildings. The United States, whatever we consider old, is still very new in your eyes, which is okay. But the retrofit market is big. And I think it's going to be bigger here over the next couple of years due to inflation, cost of money right now. People are staying home. They're going to want things done. Fortunately, I think in the US, the majority of homes are still easy to open walls up and move wires around. But in the instance where it's not, the advantage of fiber is that it's physically smaller. It's easier to work with, has more capability of being able to hide it a lot easier because you can get so much more information down, albeit just a single strand of fiber, that you may need 3 or 4 copper cables to do, which is really kind of an advantage when people think about it. There's also things that certain jacketing that can be done on fiber that's clear, that allows you to tuck it in baseboards or behind moldings, which really does give it a big advantage in that market.
You mentioned wireless as well earlier on, Rob, that given our utopia, everything would be wireless. Is it a case within the smart home that we should be focusing on the endpoint, the wireless network, the network per se? Let's focus on getting that up to speed with fiber. And then that means that whatever happens with wireless moving on, you know that you've sorted the main bit of the system out, which is your wireless networking. I heard the other day that in the residential industry, there's a kind of a mindset change about video distribution, for example. What's happening with that? How's that affecting you guys at Cleerline? How's that changing the shift, if you will, of focus between, say, video distribution and now the network itself? What have you got to say about that? Is it true?
I'll answer. I think it's 100% true. The days of matrix switches, all sources in one location, and trying to get the video and the audio out is not completely a thing of the past, but if you talk to most manufacturers, it's definitely going away. We obviously see all of the AV over IP endpoints, which is just, again, the sign of you need a robust network, because without the robust network, you're not going to get things moving back and forth like you were. We're going back to more and more localized sources with Roku and Apple TV and these streaming services. But again, I dumb it very much down to, it's really simple. A wireless network doesn't work without wires. And we look at all the cellular 5G and all these things that everybody's used to, and it has the most robust wired network running it. But everybody doesn't see that. We see the last part, which is, hey, my phone works here, my iPad works in the house, this works there. It's not unheard of to see, even just in a very small residence, somebody has a television, the TV's hooked up wireless because it needs software updates and various different applications, or it uses the streaming in it, has an Apple TV or a Roku box behind it, has a wireless access point behind it. They got 3 or 4 devices at one location that are all, quote, wireless, yet they still need wire. So I think it's more important now than ever. And I think that from the fiber side of it, in the residential space, fiber was deployed or thought of as a better way to get video to somewhere for a long time in residential. Now it's becoming more focused on, you need a robust network more than anything in order for video, audio, security, and those types of things to work. I also think that residential footprints are expanding. We used to always deal with everything inside of a residence, and now everything has really become more outside. I think COVID or the pandemic really had an impact on people staying home, but not just staying inside their homes, and really starting to see speaker systems, video systems, security systems, all of these things that are now expanded on the property. And there's length issues, latency issues. There's a million different reasons that the more robust the network, the better these things are going to work, the more enjoyable they're going to be.
You said the C word.
Sorry.
Speaking of the C word, that raised much more usage of gaming, right? And that comes into consideration. You know, if more and more people are gaming, it's going to be Olympic sport, apparently. You just have to be a gamer and you're considered an athlete. Happy days. Count me in.
That's pretty wild.
What if Chucky Egg will be in there? because I'll be.
Well, and I see this happening now, especially in the U.S., where a part of the infrastructure bill a couple of years ago now, we've really made internet connectivity. It's becoming a utility, and it's becoming something that's so important. Wireless isn't going to solve all the problems. Last week, I had an experience visiting my father, and he's got a substantial network that went down, right? It had issues, and they had to rebuild a variety of it. And we didn't have strong enough wireless phone coverage at the house. I've been accustomed to using Wi-Fi calling to basically connect to the internet or to take phone calls. And it was a pretty amazing experience having the internet, the network down for 1 or 2 days as we were getting so accustomed to working from home and this always on mentality. It's more important than ever. And when you lose it, it really becomes evident that's where we stand today versus in the past. I mean, we didn't even know what the internet was. I mean, in the 90s, I mean, come on, give me a break. You were using your phone line to call up and connect to the internet to download email. Today, there's so much more interconnectivity, and gaming is a great example of that. Most of the games that are played today are interactive, and you're playing against people all around the world. And that takes a lot of bandwidth, and that takes robust connectivity. And when the connectivity isn't there, the experience suffers. So we have to build much better networks in the home, in the office, just in general, to reach the potential of these experiences that people want and are living each day.
Do you think that perhaps a lot of residential dealers out there, now that they're feeling the pinch, perhaps are regretting the fact that they behaved somewhat insouciantly towards the installation of fibre in the past? They didn't take it seriously enough, and now, come on, this is the way that we're going to move ourselves forward and adopt it better than we did before, get trained.
I think, if my personal opinion, and obviously I was, technician, business owner, whatever you want to call it, in the residential space for over 20 years, if a strand of fiber was $40 a foot, it would be taken more seriously. They're all business owners. They're all trying to make money, as they should be. But the focus is more on the shiny objects and the sale of the shiny objects. And I think that there's very much caught up in that until they're pressed to a point that it's not. I mean, dumb or not, my analogy is we sell a lot of Ferraris in this industry with 4-cylinder engines in them. And they look really good, and they eventually get there, but they don't perform the way they're supposed to. And that's the majority of the audio video industry in the residential, in my opinion.
I'd have a Ferrari with a 4-cylinder engine.
You do?
I would have.
Oh, well, it would look good. I would pass you on my bird scooter.
I don't know what. Bird scooter. And in today's race, we've got the 4-cylinder Ferrari versus Ryan on the bird scooter.
Going back to the question you asked about wireless versus hardwired, I mean, I take the philosophy or the mentality that if the device isn't going to move, it should be connected via cable. I mean, there's no real reason why we should be using wireless bandwidth, which is different than the bandwidth that's on the network, right? To connect a device that is going to be stationary, that's not going to actually move. And I think that as you get power delivery to be at a higher level and we see more DC power related networking, I think that has the potential to move that in the right direction. And wireless becomes a layer above everything, that when you're mobile and when you're moving around the house, you have a very strong wireless network. But the devices and the little things that you need, well, we don't need any of this stuff. I mean, let's face the facts here. But the nice to haves and the various different things, at the end of the day, they can be connected via wire and take them off the wireless network. So the wireless network is not being inundated by these small little short status requests or various different things that might take up more bandwidth.
I think you make a really good point earlier about the bandwidth requirement of the wireless access points themselves. Yeah, okay, we can't stop more and more wireless adoption, but we're seeing 6 gig now for wireless. There are more and more devices being the density of a wireless network now. I mean, crikey, there's myself, my wife, 2 kids at home, but we're already pretty much saturating a Class C network, right? We've already used up most of the IP addresses with all of the stuff that's going on around the house. And without a decent infrastructure, things are going to start failing, irrespective of how fast the incoming speed is on my fibre to the property. So I think peeling this back to, obviously we've always said in residential, the most expensive cable is the one you never put in. Always put the cable to the device where possible. But at the same time, we are here to adopt the wireless technology of the future. And that is going to require as much of that ever increasing bandwidth that's being delivered to the wall of your house being made available to as many devices as you need to be made available inside the property, everywhere inside the property. I think peeling it back to that to start with, sure, making sure that the static devices as best we can have a cable to them, sure, because you're only ever going to benefit that way. But if you're not taking the part where the router that is given to you by the ISP that's going into your AV network, if that is where the weak point is, now it's time to start focusing on that before the goodies at the end.
Listen, there's a lot of different philosophies around building a network out. And in a prior life, I worked as a systems analyst for a business that had 200, 250 desks within the infrastructure. And this was in the early 2000s. And I was tasked with building out a network to be able to handle voice over IP. And the whole concept of quality of service was new to a lot of the networking and the various different layers and levels that you could parse out the network and all these various different details. But back then, we were dealing with 1.5 to 2 megabits of data throughput coming to the building. And the prescription or the advice and the design of the backplane for the network was 16 gigs at that time. So you had to have an exponentially larger backplane and better network, 1 gig to 10 gig networking capability versus 100 megabyte to handle your internal networking versus the connectivity out to the world. If you look now, I have a gig up and down at my house. They're now selling up to 10 gigs residential here in the US. And that's only going to continue to increase. I mean, when we started just 11 years ago with Cleerline, a 1 gig or a 10 gig single mode transceiver could cost you $5,000 to $6,000. Now they're $80. And then when you're talking about 100 gig, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, a lot of businesses are doing multiple 100 gig SFPs and network connections to the broadband world. That's unheard of 20 years ago. So all of these things mean that we have to continue to build out the network internally, especially as our bandwidth to the residents increases, which it's only going to continue to do. So at the end of the day, yes, I believe that there is a copper sunset on the horizon, if not already here, for the people that understand and know what networking needs to be, especially with the amount of devices that we continue to add to our networks internally in our homes. It's now important to adopt a more reliable, lower latent fiber optic network.
Sure. Do you think it's going to be easier for us when Wi-Fi access points and networking manufacturers give us cost-effective Wi-Fi access points that connect, that have a fiber connection in them? I mean, you can't find those very easily at the moment, right?
No, you can't.
Right.
And we need them.
It's going to help, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. It might also have a copper connection there purely just to use the existing copper connection for power.
For power.
For
yes.
now, right?
Yes.
But I definitely know that some manufacturers out there are now offering what look like network switches, but they're just PoE devices. They're just there to send out PoE over the existing copper framework. So that gets over the whole, I can't use fiber because it's not got power. I don't know if people say it like that. They might say it like that. They might slightly raise their voice and say it like that. But people moan about the fact that we love PoE. Okay, we'll use existing copper for PoE. Job done. Here's the fiber. Is there anything on the horizon that you've heard? Do you know of any of the networking guys that are deciding to release fiber optic wireless access points? Because surely you've got loads of fiber optic fiber switches, loads of them. Why not a fiber access point?
They've been showing up on the commercial side for a couple of years, especially as they get to trying to put 40 gig out there. I mean, wireless in the office is a major hurdle and problem right now, especially with people going back to work. And we've seen historically that technology that is a little bit ahead, such as that, hits the commercial space first and then makes its way to, especially on the networking side, makes its way to the residents. I would venture that those devices are on the horizon, not too far out.
And can you see any other trends in your vision that you think might influence future home design? Ryan? Anything else that people should be looking out for?
Again, I think it's basically the bandwidth. The more that we keep trying to feed to people and the more that people are trying to do simultaneously, unfortunately, it takes a real pain point before people break and decide that this is a real problem. Nobody wants to take the leap of faith and believe that doing the right thing up front will actually save time and money, and educating the customer on why it's more expensive. And it's not even necessarily more expensive. It's just an additional cost on top of if they're just going to put infrastructure in right now that they're not normally doing. Instead, people just live in the present and deal with the problems in the future.
And I want to bring that back to education. I always do. I think there's still a gaping hole, gaping opportunity for smart home designers, smart home integrators to really get up to speed with networking training, to become more proficient, more confident, shall I say, more comfortable with today's terminology when we talk about bandwidth and we talk about network design, when it's not just a magic cable that you plug into a magic switch and it magics network and internet everywhere. It doesn't work that way. Those people that are saying future proofing, they're the people that are thinking there's a magicness to it. There is no magic to it. Train up. We're offering that at Cleerline, an opportunity to really get the grounding that you need to go back to your customers and explain really the importance of making sure that the infrastructure is capable of managing whatever is thrown at us next. 10 years ago, you never dreamed that for $50 a month you'd be getting fiber to the property. Internet coming to the property on a fiber optic cable. Surely the people who own that building, they should get the opportunity to continue that fiber network into the property, surely. Because the people who brought the fiber optic cable to the property would do it for them happily if they were given the opportunity. They've dug the road up. They've dug the streets up. They've moved buildings and highways to get that fiber there. You just got to move a few rooms around. So let's go for it. Let's do it, right? Don't wait for the fiber optic access points to suddenly become available and think, oh, I'm going to get the cable to it now. Should have done that 2 or 3, 4 months ago or a year ago to get it in there. Training. Fair to say, Rob? I'm biased, of course.
Absolutely. I think that it's not difficult to add fiber to the overall cable plant as it may be within the home, especially in new home design and new infrastructure. Coax is not there anymore. You can replace the coax with fiber. It's not really relevant. I wouldn't be an advocate for not pulling category cable in some capacity. At the end of the day, there's a lot of different things that can make perfect use of category cable. And like you said, it could a simple way of passing DC power and creating a DC power network within the home. I mean, there's new low voltage lighting systems that are using category cable as the main cable, which is a major change here in the US, because when you can install a low voltage lighting solution for your home, you're reducing the overall cost as well as the overall efficiency is just unbelievable. I mean, a room that might historically use 200 watts or 300 watts of power to do lighting is now 15. That's a massive change. So there's a lot around energy savings. There's a lot around energy deployment and management that will start to become much more relevant to more homeowners as we move into this century, as it may be, to help us combat some of the effects of our energy usage and efficiencies. And fiber is a key component to that as well. I mean, it's something where if we have a more robust and stable network and utilizing these DC power type of solutions, we can have a much more efficient network.
Yeah, good points made. Eco. I've got to be eco-friendly. Let's wrap up. It's been a good conversation. Ryan, any final thoughts? Ryan's final thought.
No, just we got to keep educating and making more and more, not just the residential, the commercial, the end users, manufacturers. We need to make everybody more educated on the benefits of why switching over to this. It's going to take a lot of people to believe in it to really push it forward to the next level.
Don't fear the fiber, Rob?
Well, I mean, we've been preaching that for some time, and for sure, it's one of these things from a critical mass standpoint that we need to continue to push forward. The higher bandwidth connectivity we have coming to the home, I think it becomes more relevant. And then, listen, there's a lot more things coming that we don't necessarily understand or can envision today that are going to take up a lot more bandwidth. I mean, if you look at the Apple Vision and the various different ways that we're going to interact with the world around us through the internet, we're at the infant stage of a lot of this stuff that when we look back, say in the early 2000s, and if you remember the commercials with Philips with a 42-inch flat panel on a bunch of kids hanging it on a wall in a tiny apartment and everybody going, there's no way that those kids could afford that TV. What is this? This is insane. And today you can buy a 40-inch flat panel TV for probably less than $100. I mean, you know,
and
give
you
me a break.
throw it across a room and it will probably stick to the wall in about the right place.
So that's part of the challenge, right? Is convincing people that things will change and you'll have different technology that you're going to want to make use of that they can't fathom. I mean, most people just don't understand or realize that. And then all of a sudden they look back and they go, wow, what would I do without this phone? It's not a phone. It's a computer. It's a handheld computer. I mean, it just happens that we use it as a phone, but it's one of these things where it changed our world. And that's only, 15 years old? I mean...
And it's fair to say as well, it's not just the cable that's going to run out of its capability. It's the connector at the end. We've all been so used to seeing an RJ45 connector type on the end of a copper cable. Well, that's only able to do so much in future, regardless of whether the copper continues to evolve and handle higher speeds, more throughput across longer distances. The connector at the end is only as strong as its weakest link, right? Yeah. So, yeah, we're not here to poo-poo copper, but we are here to raise awareness of the importance of just making sure that the infrastructure is able to keep up with the demand and the technology that's being delivered to people's properties, to people's houses. Never before have we needed to treat homes from a technology standpoint more like a commercial space. Well, I think I had the best final thought. I win. So with that, I'm going to close off now. My thanks to Rob and Ryan. And yeah, we look forward to catching you on the next one. Keep your comments coming into us and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.